She's been called serious, ruthless, brilliant, formidable. Marie Henein is one of Canada's top criminal defense lawyers, representing clients you've heard of accused of terrible crimes. And if you've ever wondered how can she do that, well, she explains it and a great deal more in her riveting new memoir. It's called Nothing But the Truth. Marie Henein is senior partner at Henein Hutchinson LLP, and she joins us now from her office in Ontario's capital city. Hi, it's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Hi, Nam.
In your book, you write that when people ask you why you chose to become a criminal defense lawyer, that they're not really interested in hearing your answer because they've already made up their mind about why. And in the book, you say that they call what you do unseemly. And you write that what you do wasn't an accident, it was intentional. So why, and I really want to know this answer, why did you choose criminal law? And why do you think people respond in that way?
Well, I've always loved criminal law. I loved it for a number of reasons. One of the reasons was it was suitable to my personality. I love the daily work. I love the fact that it changes up with every single case. I love the advocacy part of it. A courtroom is a home to me and one of the places I enjoy being the most. In terms of the content of it, I was always attracted to the justice issues. I was always attracted to the fact that dealing with laws really govern how we behave, moral values, social values. I like being an outsider. I like fighting for the underdog. I like challenging the state and the status quo. So all of those things really combined made it the perfect job for me. And 30 years later, I still think that. In terms of the public's reaction, I get it. I think they don't get a lot of information about what our role is in the architecture of the legal system. And so it's easy to confuse you with your client. It's easy to not understand exactly what it is you're supposed to be doing in a courtroom, which is making the state prove its case, which is challenging the status quo, challenging laws that we think are unconstitutional. That is really our role. And I think it sometimes gets lost.
Well, you describe it's interesting because in the book too, you describe yourself as an outsider, that you are fighting for the underdog. But you also write in the book that you're tired of being called polarizing and controversial, and that it's your choice of profession, as you say, that is. You write that your mother's lullaby for you, which is so lovely, was that you are no different from a man. How much of what you do is about ambition versus what your mother taught you?
It's mostly about what my mother taught me and my love of the profession. You can be as ambitious as you want. It doesn't necessarily get you anywhere and doesn't get you results. What drove me and continues to drive me is an absolute love of and commitment to what I do. There really is nothing else that allows you to keep going through it and to put in the types of hours and work. But in terms of your comment about me being polarizing, I always find that odd because nobody knows what my personal views are, although they might know a little bit more as a result of this book. But they don't know what my political views are and my personal leanings are. And so when someone calls you polarizing, not knowing you, you have to think, what is it about you that they're identifying as polarizing? And the only thing they know about me is my job, what work I do. So that's what's really polarizing. It's not me. I'm not an inherently controversial person. My job is what's inciting controversy. And that's really unfortunate.
And I just wanted to say that it wasn't me saying that you were polarizing. You actually say that, you write that in the book, that this is what people say.
Yeah.
It's 2021, and we're still seeing the first of a gender or the first of an ethnicity. Why are women judged so harshly for their strength and ambition?
Well, I think that women are judged harshly, period, for their strength, for their ambition, for not having enough ambition, for not being strong enough, for being too tall, too short, being too loud, too quiet. I mean, our bodies are constantly up for grabs. Think of the elections that are being fought. Think of what's happening in Texas, where the public conversation is about us and our bodies. In the Middle East, it is an ongoing discussion, the scope of what we can do. So, when you talk about the judgment that women are subjected to, it's from all quarters, it's from all areas. And so it becomes very difficult, I think, for us to get our bearings and to get a bit of the breathing space to to make our own decisions and to see ourselves in the way that we think works for us.
From childhood, you were told by adults, both men and women, you were told to be softer, to be more diplomatic. You've been described as hard, and you say that you're actually okay with people describing you as being hard. You also write that empathy is not your go to move. Are there parts of you that you feel are misunderstood?
Well, I think you'd have to know me to understand me. I don't think there are parts of me that are misunderstood. I think what is misunderstood is the whole of me. I think people see certain parts and not others. So, what you see in the courtroom when you see that I'm tough or, aggressive or whatever it is you think I am, I don't think that a different person comes home. So, look, there are good things about my personality. There are things that I think are not so good. Certainly, empathy is not my go to move, but I'm fortunate to be surrounded by people who always check that. So, I think in this book, what I was trying to show is a little bit fuller a picture.
I think a lot of people, when they heard that you were writing a book, assumed that you would be writing a book about some of the cases that you've been a part of. Why didn't you include those cases in your book?
I think to get a real understanding of cases beyond what you've read already in the newspaper or what some clients of mine have chosen to write about, I'd have to be able to tell you about conversations that I've had with them. I'd have to be able to tell you about moments that we've had. I'd have to tell you so many different things that I cannot tell you because the law protects a solicitor client relationship. And all those intimate or more detailed things, the things that you haven't read about, that would give you a fuller picture are just not things I can talk about as a matter of ethics. And so, what would I be telling you? I'd be telling you things you've already seen. I'd be telling you things you've already read about. And also, I don't think my clients or the witnesses who've testified really need to now live through my assessment or my personal opinion of them. It's a difficult process for everybody who goes through it, and they're entitled to dignity and they're entitled to move on from it. And they're also entitled to talk about it if they choose to. But I'm not going to be the one to do that. So, look, I know my own story, and that's the one I think I can tell.
I wanted to read an excerpt from your book, and you write, here are the questions I get asked most often as a criminal defense lawyer. How can you defend someone you know is guilty? How can you defend someone charged with a heinous crime? How can you, as a woman, defend a man charged with sexual assault? How can you, as a parent, defend someone charged with abusing a child? The list of moral dilemmas that the public assumes present me with a personal struggle as a defense lawyer is endless. What personal struggle is that?
Well, I think people assume that I am morally struggling because I defend people charged with crimes. And to ask those questions means that you don't really understand what it is that my role is as a criminal lawyer. And it is not to make moral judgments. So, look, is it difficult sometimes to deal with the type of things that we deal with? For sure, we are human. But the role and the profession requires me to check my personal views, check my personal opinions, and do my job for my client and maintain my role in the administration of justice, which is a very specific one. So there's no time for those sorts of considerations. And knowing my role in the system, I don't feel morally compromised at all. I think it's an honorable profession.
I just want to push back a little bit, and I'm trying to ask this question in a respectful manner, because I think there's some people within society who, when they think of the justice system, they have an inherent understanding that justice is not for them. And you also write about that in your book. There's certain groups, Black, Indigenous, people of color, that are overrepresented in our justice system. And it's not, some bigots might think that it's because maybe those groups are inherently criminal, which is not the case. So even with judges, everybody has their own bias. So how do you square that?
Well, it's a really great question. I mean, on one hand, we think that our justice system is good because it is humane. We don't have strict sentencing guidelines, for example, as the United States does, and contributed significantly to the over incarceration of racialized groups in the States. So we have humanity that you can look at all of it, you can use your judgment, you can apply discretion. But at the same time, if you're going to give that to the court, if you're going to let them use their judgment, you have to know that it's a human process. And so people are going to judge from a perspective of what they know and what they understand. That's why you see calls for a more diversified bench, a more diversified justice system, more diversity in policing, because you bring your personal experiences and hopefully that informs some of your assessments or inferences or reactions.
The case that has probably affected public perceptions of you is your successful defense of Jian Ghomeshi, the former CBC broadcaster, who was charged with multiple counts of sexual assault. Did you have any reservations about taking on that case?
No, I've represented other people charged with that crime. I'm not the first person in history to defend a person charged with sexual assault. I'm not the first female to do so. Men have been doing it for centuries, and no one's been confused by that. It shouldn't cause any confusion or concern. It is like any other case I have acted on.
And some of your critics have called you a traitor to your gender. How do you respond to that accusation?
Well, I don't respond to that accusation because I'm not, I think we women have a lot of things in the community that we need to deal with. I don't think we need to be fighting with each other. So, it's of no moment to me. It's not a conversation that I think really advances our interests collectively, and certainly wouldn't advance mine.
Um, you know, I just want to push back on that because the people who like advocates for survivors of sexual assault, one of the things that was brought up within the court system itself, one of the criticism was that you brought up the accusers' past sexual experiences in the courtroom, and therefore it was as if they were on trial as well. What do you make of that accusation?
Well, that's not accurate, first of all. The law is very strict about when you can introduce a prior sexual history, including prior sexual history, even with the accused. You have to bring an application. You have to give notice. There's full argument. So that wasn't at play, first of all, in that trial. But there are, and the Supreme Court of Canada has done a great deal to move our thinking and the court's thinking around that and to really constrain that type of evidence. So it's not an easy threshold. It's not an accurate assessment of what happens in court. And so, just on that point, what is important is for people to come to court and actually see what happens, to read the law, to understand when this type of evidence comes in and when it doesn't, what the most recent cases are. It's very, very constrained.
Is there a way, we did hear from some of the women who were part of that specific trial who said that they felt like they were being put on trial. Is there a way to protect a victim from further trauma in the courtroom while also protecting the rights of the accused?
Yes, and we've done a really good job, I think, of doing that, and there's a lot more to be done. Victims can get representation now, which is important because you need to understand what the process is. You have representation in a lot of the applications. We've acknowledged and recognized and protected privacy interests of complainants. So there are a lot of things that have happened in the law for many years, quite substantially over the last 2 decades, and a lot more we can do to make it a better process. But the one thing we shouldn't be doing is the public shouldn't be scared to come to a court. They shouldn't assume that the decks are stacked against them. They shouldn't assume that they're being put on trial. That is incorrect. You are not being put on trial. And I say this having represented many, many complainants, victims of sexual assault. What you need to understand is how the process works, and that obviously versions of events are going to be questioned. But you have to understand why that's happening. You have to understand that it is not a personal attack, but it is profoundly difficult. There's no question that everybody sitting in that courtroom has a difficult time of the process. It is emotional. It is, it's a deeply personal experience. So what we want in the system is not that it's a pleasant experience. We want to make sure that everyone is heard,
Oh,
and
so
and just if I can finish that up, just that the environment is correct to allow people to tell the version of events that they want to tell their story fully.
Um, You also write about people being judge, jury, and executioner on social media. And I think also the trial that you had with Gomeshi was on the news every single night. So maybe the media needs to do a better job of conveying what you just said about what the situation really is like inside those courtrooms. Why does it bother you if all that matters is what happens in the courtroom?
Well, what bothers me is that I've spent my life, my profession in the administration of justice. And I think we have a very good justice system, one that we should be proud of. That does not mean we can't criticize it. We should criticize it because there are always ways to make it better, to make it fair. We have Indigenous members of the community, racialized members of the community, overcharged, over incarcerated, over tried. Those are things we need to correct. So it bothers me when we get criticism that is not informed, because then we're not having the right conversations, we're not implementing the right changes. And I think there is a responsibility on us that are in the system, those of us who report on it, to provide the public with information so that they can make the decisions that they want to make and that they can engage politicians in conversations that they want to have. But you can't do that based on a 140 character tweet. You just simply cannot. And so social media is one place to get information, but it's not the only place to get information.
And I think a lot of your how people perceive you has been shaped on social media. And after the Gomeshi case, you have been invited to speak at many different events. And in your book, you write about something that happened after you were invited to one of these events. You write in the book, the very thought of me and my choice of profession seemingly causes a stir in the now rarefied academic enclaves where challenging thought has been replaced by a sensitive gentleness more appropriate to a Victorian parlor, and where the mere thought of an unpleasant comment can bring on nervous shock. Were you, when you were invited to speak at a university, counselors were made available in the lecture hall and prefaced your public lecture with a trigger warning. Were you surprised by that reaction?
Well, I was profoundly surprised by it because they hadn't asked me what I was talking about. And what I was talking about was not anything that would have triggered anybody. It was about the history of our justice system, of how it works. It was not incendiary. It was not designed to be triggering. It was not a discussion of sexual assault at all. But the trigger warning was given without speaking to me and asking me, look, what are you going to talk about in your speech? And the presumption that students won't engage with you, and they did, by the way, it was a great conversation, and won't ask you questions or would be alarmed if you had different views, is wrongheaded. I don't think we're that sensitive. I don't think we're that weak that we can't handle different thoughts or challenging thoughts. That doesn't mean it has to be a yelling match, and it doesn't mean you have to be incendiary or volatile or obnoxious or a shock jock to have a meaningful conversation. We can have meaningful conversations where we don't agree, or we learn things, or we hear things that we just think differently about, without being shocked and warned about the conversation. I think the way that we're setting up conversations and academic discussions and debates is really, really unfortunate.
You write in the book that you really wanted to work with Eddie Greenspan, and he was your boss for many years. And I'm assuming that some of the cases that he took, he probably took cases are similar to yours, where people might not have supported the person that he was defending. Do you wonder why maybe other male attorneys don't have the same reaction that you caused for people to have?
Well, there's no question that women in a public eye are judged on a bit of a different standard. I think of Hillary Clinton and the judgment of her. The judgment was what? That not that she was not qualified, not that she wasn't a smart lady, but that her pantsuit color was awful, or that there was something about her that wasn't quite right. That she was nasty, a nasty woman. And so women are judged on a bit of a different standard, and what's brought to bear on that judgment, I think, are assumptions about us, about what we should do, how we should behave, what it means when we look a particular way, dress a particular way, adopt a particular profession. So, no, it is certainly perplexing that the fact that as a female, I'm doing the same job that men have done for centuries would cause anybody to be shocked or alarmed by it.
I know you said earlier that you didn't have any reservations on taking on the Gomeshi case, but it feels you probably tired of talking about that case, and and it's probably going to maybe define your career. I don't know if I'm speaking out of turn, but I'm wondering if you've had those thoughts and whether or not maybe you regret taking the case on.
I don't regret taking any case that I've done on because I don't regret how I've um, performed my professional obligation. I don't regret my role in the justice system. So I don't regret cases that I've taken on. And it would be like asking a doctor if they regretted doing their job. I don't regret doing my job. There isn't a single day I go to bed regretting doing the work that I do.
You wrote at the beginning, you wrote that you wanted, when you were writing this book, you spoke to your family members because you were trying to understand who you are through them. What did you learn about yourself?
It's interesting. I think I learned that the immigrant experience, being an immigrant, and all of it that comes along with getting your footing in a new country and your family sort of settling in and understanding it, is an experience that at my ripe old age still really is visceral for me and is really very much a part of the way I look at my place in a lot of areas, including in this profession. That I think I learned that I hadn't necessarily worked all of that through.
And you said it was important for people to know your name, and that's why you didn't change it for your dad.
Yes, that's very true.
Why was that important?
Well, he came to this country, we came to this country, and he wanted us to have a shot. My family wanted me to have a shot as a woman in particular, and I always said to them that if I fail, it'll be their name. And if I succeed, it certainly should be their name that's recognized. It's who I am. It's my name, and I'm not changing myself or my name for anybody.
When future lawyers ask you for advice in the book, you offer this to them. You write, be prepared to give up a significant part of yourself. What did you mean by that?
The job is difficult, and the job weighs on you in a lot of different ways. You're required to be relatively resilient and impervious to a lot of stuff. You work through things that are difficult and most people don't have to deal with. And so what it does is it means that it's very hard for you to then come home and play Lego, right? Or come home and just be cheerful when you've spent an entire day in a murder trial. It's hard to switch gears. And what happens ultimately, I think, at least for me, is that the gears can't be switched at some point. It becomes more of your personality, and so it's more than just a job. It's very much a profession that defines who you are, and there are great things about it, but there are negative things about it. And you do have to be tough. And it's not, it's great to be tough in court. It may not be so great when you're having dinner with your family.
And I love that you mentioned, you talked about the idea that women are asked, how do you balance it? But we rarely ask men that question. Congratulations on the book. Your family sounds incredible. Thank you so much, Marie. We appreciate all the time you gave us tonight.
Thanks, Nam.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.